Hey, it's Marko here from Fair Realty, Victoria, BC. Today I'm going to talk about GST, which is a 5% tax that's applicable to brand new real estate purchases. Whether you're buying directly from a builder or a developer, you have to pay an additional 5% tax. So if you're buying $1 million house, you pay $50,000 in GST. In the last couple of months, I've been representing quite a few buyers buying brand new real estate. And a couple of the buyers asked me an interesting question. They said, Marko, wouldn't it be smarter for us to go and buy a one-year-old townhome or a one-year-old single-family home? That way we wouldn't have to pay the 5% GST tax, and essentially we would save $50,000 on $1 million purchase. And the thing is, you wouldn't really save the $50,000 tax, and let me explain why. I think the misconception of paying 5% GST and that tax automatically being lost is probably a bit due to car sales. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare a $1 million home purchase compared to a $100,000 car purchase to illustrate the difference. So 5% GST on a brand new real estate purchase. On a brand new car in BC, it's 12% plus luxury tax. But to make the numbers easy, let's say it was 5% on a brand new car. So a $100,000 car, and let's say you had to pay 5% in tax, so it'd be $105,000. Well, on the resale is where things switch up a bit. On used resale real estate, there's typically no GST. So if someone went to sell that house that they paid $1 million plus GST a year from now and they listed it for $1 million, the buyer would not have to pay any GST. If it was listed for $1 million and the seller was willing to sell it for $1 million, it would sell for $1 million, no additional tax. In terms of GST, there would still be property transfer tax, but there would be no additional GST if it was a used resale property. However, if someone went to buy that $100,000 car, there would be 5% tax again. Once again, the tax on cars is more than 5%, and there's an exemption for EVs, but there's taxes on resale cars. So no one's gonna pay $100,000 for a one-year-old car when they can go to the dealership and buy the same car for the exact same price, including tax. Not to mention, cars depreciate a lot faster than houses. So a one-year-old car, it's worn through the tires, and a number of other things. It's getting closer to oil changes. It has a much shorter lifespan than a house. So what happens with houses? If someone buys a house today for $1 million plus GST directly from a builder, and they have to sell it in a year, that seller is going to want the most amount of money for their house. They're going to see that the builder is continuing to sell houses for, let's say, $1 million plus 5% tax, so $1,050,000. They're going to say, well, why don't we, as the seller, price our house at $1,040,000? We'll take a $10,000 discount because maybe that there's the house, there's been some chipped paint, maybe there was a scratch in the floor, but no seller is going to list it for $1 million, because 98% of buyers would go and they would buy the one-year-old house for $1 million and no GST rather than buy it off the developer or the builder for $1 million plus 5% GST. And that's why you can't really automatically save that 5% GST if you go buy a house that's 1 or 2 years old. The seller is looking at what the developer builder is asking, including GST, and maybe lowering that number a bit, but they're certainly not lowering that number by 5% because realistically, the house hasn't depreciated 5% in that first year or two. This gets a bit more convoluted in British Columbia because we have the property transfer tax, and there's a property transfer tax exemption for brand new properties up to 1.1 million. So if we go back to that $1 million example, a buyer would have to pay 5% GST on $1 million property. But if they're going to make it their principal residence and they meet some other criteria, they would be saving $18,000 or 1.8% in property transfer tax, which they would calculate into their equation. But 1.8% is still not equivalent to 5% they would be saving if they were buying a resale house. So this is a bit convoluted, but essentially because there is no GST on used resale real estate sales, you are not going to save the entire 5% GST by buying a slightly used house, because the seller is going to adjust their asking price to be likely just slightly lower than the builders or developers asking price, including GST. I hope that makes sense, but my point is the 5% GST you buy when you buy a brand new property, you're not automatically losing it. The property transfer tax, on the other hand, that's an automatic loss. Why is the property transfer tax an automatic loss? Because the buyer has to pay the property transfer tax on your resale property. Once again, there's that caveat. There's the property transfer tax exemption of up to 1.1 million on brand new property. But for example, if you bought a house for 1.3 million and had to pay the property transfer tax, that is a complete loss, because when the buyer goes to buy your house for 1.3, they have to pay the property transfer tax yet again. I hope that makes sense. Marko, Fair Realty.